It is good to be with you again, and it is in God's providence that I'm here. Pastor Ed has invited me to come and speak in the morning service several times, but I have obligations. I have a large adult Sunday school class at a church in Derby, but our church has not resumed all of its services. They have the preaching right now, but they haven't resumed Sunday school yet, and so I was free to come, and I said, sure, I'd be glad to come. This is I think the second time I preached in the Sunday morning service, maybe third, but I think at least second, and as was said, I've done 4 or 5 seminars, and we've been talking about having another one, but haven't to settle on a topic yet or a date or any of those things. Things have been up in the air lately, you might have heard. The text this morning is from John chapter 16, the last verse, verse 33. Jesus had been talking to his disciples in the upper room, giving them his last instructions. If you have a red letter Bible, you notice that all of chapter 14, 15, and 16, and 17 is in red ink, showing you that it's the words of Jesus. And they're not more inspired than the other parts of the Bible, but they are Jesus' words. And this is his final instruction given to the apostles in the upper room. And they're facing some really tough times. Less than 3 or 4 hours later, their whole world is going to be turned upside down as Jesus is arrested and denied and condemned and crucified and dies. And these are not in their plan. Their whole world is in turmoil. And that's the title of today's sermon, is A World of Trouble. But the text says, John 16:33, I have said these things to you that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. That's just an old-fashioned word for trouble, problems, difficulties. But take heart, I have overcome the world. The word translated overcome there is a stronger word than we have in English. It means I have conquered the world. Not just with difficulty overcome it, but I have conquered the world. And so, but in this world, you will have trouble. And I want to talk about that a little bit today. There was a historian in England 250 years ago named Edward Gibbon. He wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire in 6 volumes. I know actually one person who's read it all the way through. I tried. But he said famously in that book, history indeed is little more than the register of the crimes, follies, and misfortunes of mankind. You know, that's what you find in the history books, the disasters, the calamities, the wars, the plagues, the deaths, and all of these things. Or they have a modern equivalent of that in the TV industry. You know, what's the first story they're going to run on the nightly news? And the slogan they go by is, if it bleeds, it leads. You know, if there's a big car wreck, if there's a shooting somewhere, if there's a fire somewhere, if there's a disaster, that's what you get a steady diet of. And I heard a guy on the radio this week say, if you want to have a vast improvement in your outlook on life, turn off the news for a week. And I am sure that that's right. My wife could tell you that I can't watch the national news because I talk back to them. And I'm sure it's not good for my blood pressure. I'm sure it's not good for my attitude. But in truth, there is both good and bad in life. And if we if we count your blessings, name them one by one. If we wrote all the good things down, the list would be much longer than the bad things, for the most part. But that doesn't mean there aren't calamities in life. I suppose if you've been watching what's happening in the big cities in America, you're very happy you live in a small town in southern Kansas, right? I live out in the country myself, and so we don't have all the big city problems. But the truth is, all of life, collectively, humanity, and individually, is marked by surprises, disruptions, calamities, occasional disasters, chaos, turmoil, confusion, and uncertainty. And we have experienced a fair amount of that here in the States in the last several months. You know, there's all kinds of disasters. There's natural disasters. There are earthquakes. We didn't have any of those in Kansas until the last 10 or 15 years, right? I have cracked plaster in my house from some of those. But earthquakes, huge disasters, or volcanic eruptions. We don't have volcanoes in Kansas, and this I am very glad. But we do have tornadoes. How far is it to Greensburg? But that tornado destroyed that town. We've had tornadoes through Hayesville, which is just down the road from me, in the last 20 years that have destroyed major portions of that town. So those are disasters. And The weatherman may predict it, but there's nothing you can do to get out of the way. And of course, in Kansas, if there's a warning, you're supposed to go out and look for the storm, right? I've done that all my life. So, but calamities and things that we have nothing to do with affect us anyway. I think of the poor farmers here in Kansas. They've got beef cattle, good cattle. I like to eat I like Kansas beef better than meat I've eaten any place in the world, and I've been a lot of places. But they can't get them to market because the processors out in Garden City and out in the western part of the state are shut down or partly shut down. And so they're losing, somebody said $500 a head on their animals. I mean, if I had my own butcher shop, I'd buy one from somebody, at full price and help them out. They had nothing to do with the shutting down of the national economy and the coronavirus business out in Garden City. Had nothing to do with it at all, but they're bearing the brunt of that. And it's an economic disaster. I think of the oil industry. I mean, 10 years ago, oil was the hottest commodity here in Harper, right? I mean, all this lateral drilling and everything else. And now there's nobody drilling oil anywhere. They don't even want to pump it out of the ground at the prices that they have to sell it for now. I have a sister who lives in Houston, and she says that the ship channel down there, 25% of all the oil refineries in America are in Houston. 30 square miles of oil refineries. Can you imagine? That's almost as big as the whole county. 30 square miles, and they have ships lined up in the ship channel and out into the Gulf of Mexico loaded with oil and no place to unload it because all the storage tanks are full because the airlines are not buying it, people are not buying it for their cars, and so on. And so these people are being hurt by something that had nothing to do with their own actions. So there's natural disasters. Whether this present virus scare is real or not, there have been real plagues throughout history. In the Middle Ages, there was the Black Death, which came from the Middle East with the Crusaders returning from Palestine, and it killed a third of the population of Europe. I've been reading a book lately about the Great London Plague of 1665, and that killed about a third of the population of London. They knew nothing about bacteria. They knew nothing about personal hygiene or sanitation. The cities were filthy, and so disease spread very quickly. They knew nothing about, they had no genuine medical care of any kind. And so they had to face that. If you got it, or someone in your family got it, the chances of you dying were very, very high. And there's nobody to take care of you or to tend you. They just quarantined you in your house, locked you up until you died, and then they carried the bodies to the cemetery. We have a great deal more hope today because of our technology and our advances and so on. There was a flu epidemic in Kansas, started in Kansas, believe it or not, in 1918. It's called the Spanish influenza. I'm glad they don't call it the Great Kansas Influenza. But out in Haskell County, which is out past Dodge City, apparently some soldiers home on leave caught it there. Maybe it was a mutation that was picked up from the swine or the chickens, but they carried it back to Fort Riley, where all the soldiers were being trained for World War I. And from there, the soldiers were dispersed to different forts, and they carried it with them, and then they went to Europe, and they carried it there, and it circled the world, and it killed more people than the war did. Maybe 25, 30, 40 million people, they're not exactly sure. 20 million people died in World War I. That influenza epidemic in 9 months killed more people than that 4 years of war. And they had no treatment for it, and it was extremely contagious, and it was extremely deadly. If you got it, your chances were about 1 out of 3 that you would die. So these kinds of things really do happen, whether the current one is genuine or not. And riots. We see these riots on TV, and I don't understand why elected officials tell the police not to stop them from destroying property and killing people. This is what we have elected officials for, right? So they're the ones who are in control of the police, the sheriff's department, to protect us from those who would do us harm. Otherwise, you end up with just vigilante. But I see this, and the turmoil in the cities, millions of dollars worth of, hundreds of millions, probably $1 billion worth of damage nationwide now from people rioting. Now, protest, fine. You have the constitutional right to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for the redress of grievances. That's what it says in the First Amendment. And I've done that. I went to a school board meeting in Wichita years ago, and I didn't like one of their policies, and I told them I didn't like their policy. But I assembled peaceably, and I told them publicly what I didn't like. But I didn't burn anything down. I didn't destroy anything. But riots are also not something new. If you're my age, I'm 67, You can remember the Watts riots in the 60s. You can remember the riots connected with the Rodney King thing out in California in the 90s. If you're a student of history, you know that during the American Civil War, there were draft riots in New York City. When they instituted the draft, there were 200 and some people killed in a week's time in New York City, 1863, during draft riots. And if you've not, does that surprise you? But there were, so rioting is human nature. But all of these disasters, if you focus on these, it seems like life is coming apart at the seams. If a disaster is happening to you, it is coming apart at the seams. And where in your life are you going to find stability and certainty and something solid that you can depend on in such times of calamity and disaster? Turmoil is part of life. Eliphaz, the friend of Job, in Job chapter 5 says, "Man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward." I remember when I was a Boy Scout, we'd go out, we'd have bonfire at night, and somebody throw a log on the fire, and the sparks would fly, and sure enough, they flew upward, right, into the darkness. And that's the way life is. Into every life, a little rain must fall. Well, that puts it very mildly. Into every life, there will be calamities and trials and distress and trouble. Job repeated that in chapter 14 when he said, "Man that is born of woman is few of days and full of trouble." And talk about the troubles that he had. There's the old song, "Nobody knows the troubles I've seen, nobody knows but Jesus." Well, we know the troubles that Job had, and calamities upon calamity upon calamity. Jesus himself said, "In this world you will have trouble." And if you haven't experienced trouble, just wait a while. It'll come, and it'll find you. But in this world, the calamities that we have, and I dare say that we have been spared most of the calamities that most of people throughout history have had to endure. I mean, we've never had armies march through our towns. In World War II, in Ukraine, where I go as a missionary, there are towns that were attacked by the Nazis and destroyed coming this way. Then the Russians came back and destroyed it this way. And the devastation and the poverty and the enslavement to communism, all of these things, we in America have little idea what some people in this world have had to go through. But there is trouble. But the trouble that the world has gone through is you ain't seen nothing yet, as they say. There is a time coming. Jesus describes it in each of the first three Gospels. It's called the Great Tribulation, the time of trouble, the time of Jacob's trouble. It goes by several names in the Bible, 7 years long. After Jesus comes to take believers out of this world, then the Antichrist will be revealed, and the world will face a time of crisis such as it has never endured before. Let me read a little bit from Luke chapter 20. Luke chapter 21, his account of what Jesus had to say about this coming time of trouble. In verse 9 he says, "And when you hear of wars and tumults, do not be terrified, for these things must first take place, but the end will not be at once." And then he said, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and pestilences. And there will be terrors and great signs from the heaven." And then further down in the same passage, in verse 25, he says, "And there will be signs in the sun and moon and stars, on the earth distress of nations in perplexity because of the roaring of the sea and the waves, people fainting with fear and with foreboding of what is coming on the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken." And of course, this is described in much greater detail in the book of Revelation, starting in chapter 6 through chapter 19. You have chapter 6, you have the four horsemen of the apocalypse. You have famine, and you have disease, and you have war, and you have death. And from the description that it gives in the scriptures, a third of mankind will die. And there's 7.8 billion people on earth right now. That's more than 2 billion people who will die. That's everybody in North and South America combined with a bunch more from someplace else. That's everybody in China and India combined dying. And this is what will happen when the judgments of God fall upon this world because of mankind's continued rebellion against God. And so, but in this prospect, this world is full of trouble, and we have no idea when the calamities are going to fall on us. We have no idea. I mean, Job's children were having a banquet, right? They're celebrating the birthday of one of their siblings. And suddenly the wind came and collapsed the house and killed them all. Disasters can come in a second's time: a car wreck, a plane crash, a fire, a drowning, an accident. All these can come so suddenly upon us when we don't expect it. But in all of this world of uncertainty, is there anything that can serve as an anchor to our souls? And the answer, of course, is yes, there is. In Malachi chapter 3, verse 6, he gives these words of assurance to the Jews. He said, I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore, you children of Jacob are not consumed. God doesn't change. And over in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 8, it says that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. The Jesus that I trusted as my Savior 50 years ago is the same one that I have now and the same one that will see me into eternity. God does not change. He does not change in his omniscience. That's a big theological term. Simply means that God knows everything, and he literally does know everything. He knows our thoughts. He knows our motives. He knows the flow of events in the past. He knows the current situation. He knows events of the future. In fact, the events of the future are in his plan and control. He knows everything. Nothing ever catches God by surprise. He never sits around someday and says, man, I hadn't thought of that. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? He never gets flustered by the turn of events. Never, because he knows all things. He knows your situation. He knows how you got in it. He knows what his purpose is in letting you go through it, and he knows what the end result will be. God is omniscient. He knows all things. And so there's nothing that's ever going to catch him by surprise. Nothing. He is also omnipotent. That means he has all power. Jesus said, all power is given to me in heaven and in earth. And that covers everything, folks. Jesus has all power. God is not getting sick or old or weak or disabled or senile or any such thing. He has all the power that he ever had. And how much power is that? He spoke the universe into existence by simply saying, let there be. Let there be light. Let there be dry land. Let there be living creatures. By his word alone, God is able to speak everything. This vast universe, space, mass, and time, every molecule, every atom, every electron, every quark, every particle, he spoke it into existence by the force of his power. And if he can do that, he knows how to rescue me from any circumstance that I find myself in. He is an anchor. Over in the book of Daniel, 4 times it says in the chapter, or several times in chapter 4, it says, the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men. You see the dictators in different countries. You see the horrible rulers. You see the terrible governments and the terrible things that are happening. Those folks, dictators, think that they are in charge. But the truth is God is in charge. The Most High does rule in the kingdoms of men. And I'm glad. We have a presidential election coming up this year. I know how I want it to turn out, but however it turns out, I know that God will work all things for my good and for my benefit and for my blessing ultimately. Because he is omnipotent, and he does rule in the kingdoms of men. And God is omnipresent. There's no place that you can go that God isn't already there. Years ago, you had to be very old to remember, when the first cosmonauts went up into outer space, Yuri Gagarin, he in his mocking atheist way, he said, well, I don't see God around here. Well, my friend, you're not looking for him. He's there. But there's a statement made in Psalm 139 about God's omnipresence. And this gives me great assurance. No matter what my circumstances are, where I find myself, God is there. It says in Psalm 139, starting in verse 7, where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me. It's nighttime. Could God possibly see me here in the deep darkness that I find myself in? Even there, your right hand shall lead me and hold me. If I say, surely the darkness will cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as day, for the darkness is as light with you. Everywhere I go, every circumstance I'm in, everything in my life, no matter the calamity, the disaster, God is there. And he is my anchor and my rock, my source of hope, the one upon whom I can depend. Jesus, there's a promise made in Hebrews 13:5, I will never leave you nor abandon you. Now, there's some times where you look around, you can't see God. You don't know where he is. Job said, I wish I knew where I could find God. Well, God was there the whole time. I remember one time when our children were small, we went to visit a church where a friend of mine was pastor, and most